Good evening and welcome to our roundtable discussion on how the media performed in 2015. I'm your host, Anne Kiguta. Let me introduce my panelists to you. Eric Ngeno, the Director of Messaging at State House. Charles Kirich, Editor, The Star. Udwa Kamimo, Host, Cheche. Harun Mwangi, CEO, Media Council of Kenya. Michael Mumo, Editorial Director, Capital Group Limited, and Linus Kaikai, Chair, Kenya Editors Guild, and General Manager, Nation Broadcasting Division. Gentlemen and lady, you're all welcome to the program. I will begin by getting responses from each of you on how you feel the media fared in 2015. Michael.
Thank you. It is my belief that we can always do better. For me, I think it's important for the media to look at how they do investigations. It is imperative that we empower people who do investigative pieces. We have to allocate resources to investigative desks. We have to give people time to do these pieces, because I believe in a newsroom there's always the pressure of what are you producing on a day-to-day basis. You know, investigative pieces would require you to take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you know, probing a story and, you know, laying out all the facts. Yeah. The other thing I believe is that, you know, we have very young newsrooms. Recently I was privileged to be on the paper flights from Rome to Kenya, to Uganda, to CAR, and I met people who have institutional memory. I met a lady who's covered 3 popes, you know, in her lifetime. If you come to a newsroom like yours, I believe you may have people who've just covered 1 president, or 2 at the most. So we need to have, you know, a scenario where we can have people remain on the field, you know, to be able to bring out that experience. Because like I said, sometimes you read stories, you watch stories, and they lack depth. So I think it is important for us to go back to the drawing board as far as giving people well-researched stories.
It sounds like a management issue where we're not able to retain the kind of talent that you need to really have that high-quality output.
You see, what normally happens is if you're doing a good job, we make you a desk person, isn't it? Because then we believe you have made it. But then I think we need to relook at that scenario where we enable people to, you know, remain in the field, but, you know, give them certain privileges for them to be able to continue being on the field.
Right. Udwak.
I think I would agree with Michael, actually, that there's always room to do better. I think that in some instances we do very well as a media fraternity, but in others we do poorly. And I think what you'll find in coverage overall is a tension between coverage of issues and coverage of events. But, you know, what compromises that is that, you know, you're trying to balance these tensions, you know, tensions of ownership versus, you know, the actual editorial. Tensions of, as Michael talked, retaining, as Michael said, retaining quality staff. And those challenges have to do with how you compensate people, how you ensure that they are trained when they come in, you know, as they carry on with their careers. Tensions that have to do with research and planning. Because again, because of the pressures of putting out material, because of the pressures of running a business and trying to earn a revenue, that you find that quality and standards are sometimes compromised. All
right, you've talked about events and issues and the difference in that coverage. Give us examples of what stood out as, you know, great coverage of an event, perhaps not issue-based.
Great coverage of an event. The U.S. President's visit to Kenya, Barack Obama, everybody, including Citizen TV, went live on this, you know, followed POTUS, you know, the President of the United States everywhere. But I think when it came to the issues around the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, you know, the coverage was a bit patchy. Some people did it better than others. You found, you know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, the family, that hug with his sister Auma consumed lots of media space. But that's not to say that we did anything wrong, because there's a human element to it. But there were issues that we should have been prepared for, and I'm not sure that we did the issues justice.
All right, Linus, you run one of the biggest news desks in the country. Your assessment of your own team's performance in the industry?
Well, Barack Obama came here in July and described the Kenyan media as feisty. I agree with him. It is one of the qualities of the Kenyan media. There is a lot to be proud of about the Kenyan media. We still do command a very important space in the national life. You cannot ignore the Kenyan media. It really strives. I'm not saying it is perfect. It works hard to do its role. And one of the things that really stood out in 2015 for me is the resilience of the industry. It went through a lot of challenges. The space within which the media operates was challenged. We all remember the Powers and Privileges Bill that tried to make coverage of Parliament very, very difficult. There were other similar attempts to legislate against the space within which the media operates. And what happened? The media triumphed. And not because of the practitioners themselves, but because of the nature of the society in Kenya. The society does understand that there is a place for independent media in the country, and don't touch it, don't disturb it, let them do their work. And I think that resilience really showed itself in 2015.
If there's anyone feisty at this table, it must be Charles Courage from The Star with your catchy headlines. Is feistiness necessary to, get the point across?
I don't know whether Obama was right or wrong to describe it in that way, but let me just look at the bigger media environment in 2015. We had the benefits of digital migration. So we have an explosion of media houses and TV stations that have come into the scene, some of them that we never even had time to actually consume properly. And when you have your decoder and you shuffle through, you find all these vernacular TV stations that have come. Many of them are evangelical and have a lot of people singing and dancing. So I think we need to work on the content. It's good they're there, but we can't just have people preaching from morning to evening. We need more content. But the
and why not? Perhaps the country needs salvation.
Yeah, but if you have 100 stations with 80 of them preaching, I think you're missing the opportunity to take advantage of that digital dividend that has come our way. But the other issue is there was a big experiment when the People Daily became a free newspaper. Everybody has been observing and watching to see what will happen. Will they survive? Will they collapse? How has it happened in other countries? Right now they seem to be doing quite well, which is all right. We don't know whether it's because of creativity or because of affiliation to influential people, but either way they are doing
knows very well.
quite well. Then another issue that occupied most of 2015 was the fact that our media council was paralyzed. There's a court case which prevented the replacement of commissioners whose terms had expired. So we have a media council that doesn't have any commissioners. We have a complaints commission where all the commissioners' terms expired. So there is actually no dispute that has been filed about a media story with the media council or the complaints commission that has been heard. Many times I showed up at the Media Complaints Commission for a hearing and I would be told there is no hearing going to take place because we don't have commissioners. So we are hoping that in 2016 that dispute that paralyzed the Media Council will be resolved so that we can have a working council. And just the fourth thing is the government, in its wisdom, decided to set up something called the Government Advertising Agency. So they have collated all the advertising to one body and they will decide who gets advertising and who doesn't. Now you will know that government advertising is the biggest source of revenue for media houses. So it might be bringing about efficiencies in terms of managing adverts, but it could also be a big stick that they are wielding so that they can use it for some form of censorship, so that if you don't play ball or you write stories you don't like, we will withhold advertising from you. And that is going to be a very big issue in 2016. And finally,
and call the tune.
Exactly. Finally, of course, there has been the growth of social media, and that has somehow dictated the direction media houses take. The future is digital. The future is mobile. You cannot have a newspaper like The Star without having a digital platform. Linus's outfit together with the Citizen must go digital in 2016.
No, Linus was cutting cake the other day. He didn't even invite his colleagues from across the field. But we'll leave that for another day. Harun, while limping on the job, have you been able to properly evaluate our performance, and what would you say it is?
Well, I would say that generally we performed well in 2015. Despite of a few challenges. Number one is the challenges of professionalism in the industry and the failure of the media to look into issues of corruption within the media houses themselves, and particularly among the journalists. And this is even more difficult when it comes to the county level, where journalists have been incorporated into the county government, and they work as consultants at the same time work as reporters, therefore compromising the independence in the media. The other challenge was that the other thing was that 2015 was a transformative year for media, so to speak. Media has been leading in terms of reforms in the last maybe 25 years. But for the first time, we see reform taking place in the media industry. The reformer, or the pusher for reforms, is now being reformed. And of course, there has been a lot of resistance, so to speak, from the media industry. And some of it has been because of self-preservation, so to speak, business interest, commercial interest. And therefore, again, that has also raised a lot of issues. The other thing was...
or the fact that traditionally we're used to state agencies clamping down on our freedom and restricting our ability to operate.
Well, I think, of course, that the government is a little bit allergic to issues of criticism as well. And as Lina said, there has been a lot of attempt to come up with the laws that are restricting media freedom. But it's a question that we also need to reflect upon ourselves as media. Is the government raising issues because there's a challenge of self-regulation, self-examination as media? Are we doing enough in terms of our conduct and behavior as an industry, as opposed to just blaming the government in terms of wanting to put up laws that basically are going to constrain us? So those are challenges and tensions that also we needed to look at. At the Media Council level, we agree we have a case in court that was brought forward by the media owners, the editors, the KJ, the Media Council of Kenya. But the problem, and to be honest, is that if we call for negotiation to see how we can possibly get out of the court and see whether we can amend those contentious issues, some of the media bodies don't come in, like KUJ would come in with a position, Editors Guild will come in with a position, and to be honest, we don't know whether this interests really are a media interest or personal interest as institutions. So those are also challenges that we want to face.
All right, Eric.
Yeah, it's been a mixed year. I agree that the consensus that comes here that there's a lot of scope for improvement, but I would not, in government, you have to be on the side of government to see how much you need the media. And then, of course, it will temper your expectations and the way you approach and engage the media. We have felt that we have not optimized that relationship, both perhaps as government, because when we are called to account, most of the time we become defensive instead of becoming engaging. For instance, we may delay in providing information. We may feel that information that's not confidential in any way at all somehow is very sensitive and confidential. We need to develop more trust. We need to develop more trust. But on the other hand, I think media, like you said, Mumo, maybe there's a bit of capacity issue at this point in time. When I was growing up, the editors at Nation used to write English texts, and they were the standard setters for communication skills throughout the country. I'm afraid to say that some of those superficial manifestations of, for instance, capacity constraints relate to even, for instance, basic editorial standards. Sometimes you find some serious clangers running through paragraphs and paragraphs of newsprint, and then it tells you, for instance, the coverage of, like you said, the GES, Obama's visit. Obama's visit and GES were the same event, but we'll never know that. There was GES and it looked like a side event. Yeah, largely because once something escalates to technical or very involved issues, the capacity seems to disappear once we cannot describe events and personalities.
Right.
Yeah. When we have to, so what is innovation? Why do we need that innovation? What is entrepreneurship? What are the objectives? Who are involved? What is the end game? People, like for instance, even WTO is ongoing right now. And yesterday, if you watch the news, the reporter seems to be, and the analysts seem to be just running around with words without actually coming up with who's doing what,
what is WTO? Why is it important for us?
You're saying capacity is an issue, but I want to take you back to your opening remarks, which basically was that you haven't optimized the relationship. Now, that's very glossy, but the fact is the government's approach has been shake with one hand and hold a rock with the other. Let's talk about the kind of legislation that you have been pushing through in Parliament that restricts the space for journalists to report. Let's talk about incidences where journalists have been beaten on the job by none other than GSU personnel. Talk about the Internal Security Minister, Nkaiseri, basically going out and saying that really you got what you deserved.
There is opportunity in all those things. There's opportunity in all those things. For instance, what government, what executive does, there is no, Parliament is independent. And we have some bills that come up in Parliament that also
where you have the majority.
That also surprise the executive. I mean, there are some bills that come up and they're discussed on the floor of the House, trying to create some privileges and immunities, and they're just outrageous. And it's how democracy works. It's how democracy works, and I think it is how the media also approaches that issue. For instance, the public interest. It is Parliament's duty, and it's also the media's duty to enforce that public interest, to ensure that it's protected at all times. Yeah, but at the executive, you have to understand that. Once you have understood that, then you realize most of the things that are put at the doorstep of government don't belong to us. For instance, people talk about prosecutions. People talk about big fish not going to jail. The DPP is independent. The courts are independent. The president cannot hold the ministers that he has fired and say, I'm taking them to committee. There has to be a process. So once he has done his part as executive in terms of his administrative mandate, I think we should give him the bouquet he deserves. But the barbs keep still coming. Yeah? The barbs still keep coming. You have to locate that thing within the framework of our dispensation to
But let's talk about the things that you're actually responsible for.
Yes.
For instance, your majority leader is allowing some of this legislation to go through Parliament. Why can't he whip members to disagree with it on day one?
Parliament itself is very democratic. Parliament is democratic. The standing orders allow members to introduce any motion, and depending on its merits, it will pass through or not pass through. There is a role, of course, for the majority leader in Canberra, and you've had him even himself opposing some of the motions and some of the amendments and some of the legislations that have been
you just need to take a look at the faces around your screen. They all disagree. Let's start with Linus. Let
me just disagree with Eric here. It tries to separate the executive from the legislature. This is a case of a train engine trying to argue with its wagons, really. Jubilee works in a straight line. That's a fact. It's the closest we've ever come in terms of organizational function to what can used to be. What Parliament does, what the Jubilee side of Parliament does, is something that is shared right across the party. And I want to say, when it comes to the legislative pieces that have been attempted there, I think the tone was set by the executive. We've had the president, for example, talking about wrapping meat with newspapers.
For Kirich, right?
For Kirich, that's the job is trying to, newspapers are for wrapping meat.
Right.
This is the tone. It goes down to the rest of the functions of government. I think it even goes down to Tana Delta, where journalists were beaten, because you are seen as basically meat wrappers. So the tone was set by the executive, and the hostility cascaded down the ranks of government.
But when government argues about when it comes to advertising, for instance, and they're basically saying that we have a right to manage our costs, and quite frankly they do. Media has interpreted that as a way of sort of clamping down on our freedoms and saying the government is trying to dictate, the stories that we run and associate revenue with that. Are we ourselves as an industry being honest? For heaven's sake, an advertiser can put their money where they want to. Woodwork.
Actually, I want to flip the question back to you, and what we need to consider actually is the role of media in a society, right? We inform, we educate, we hold people to account, and you'll find that when you break down those rules further, that as Linus has so accurately described, you find that in the role of holding people to account, holding public officers to account, that's where we run into a lot of trouble. Now, you talk about, whether we're being disingenuous as media. Well, my observation really is that we hold the society and public officers to standards that we ourselves have trouble adhering to. Everyone's agreeing with that. I mean, look at, I'm not sure we've had any sort of exposés, even though we hear about them. Now, I don't know whether they're true, but we hear about alleged, you know, political interference and political manipulation of stories. We know that people will choose certain journalists or media houses that they think might be friendly to their agenda. And, you know, it's great that we're having this conversation, but, you know, how we, you know, recalibrate ourselves going forward, particularly in 2016, the election year, as, you know, Charles pointed out, that will be very interesting to see. Right, Momo?
The media has been pushing for self-regulation, and I think it's important for us, like I said, to go back and look at whether we are doing things right. There's this small book that I normally keep close to me. It's the Code of Conduct for the Practice of Journalism in Kenya by the Media Council of Kenya. You know, it talks about having accurate stories. It talks about fair comment. It talks about how you cover children issues. You know, you have a TV station that covers, you know, an incident involving a minor, and you black out the minor's face, but you show the mother. No, it's a thin line.
Exactly.
The other thing is that, you know, you read stories, you watch TV. It's like we normally say, let's publish today or air the story today. We'll get the other side tomorrow. So we need to also, as media, you know, go back and ensure that we are running the profession as professionals, and then we can deal with other issues that come from the likes of, you know.
Yeah, you know, I'm intrigued by the tone of Michael's arguments. I think he's on the other side. He should be saying what we are doing, not, you know, making suggestions that the media should do this, and I think he's an integral part of the media. But just looking at it, yeah, I think the media has also failed to take the opportunity to come together to lobby for things that are important. So when you have, like the bill that Lina's talked about coming to Parliament, there is no industry voice. If you try and get, there's no sitting where the Media Owners Association, the Kenya Editors Guild, the Union of Journalists, the Correspondents Association sit together and say, this is our position. That's where we've lost out. We have problems that we try and address, but they say it is the editors making noise. Why not the journalists? For example, you know, during one of the ICC cases, somebody came here, and one of the lawyers came here and filed a case in court.
You mean here to Kenya? Or
Kenya,
to
Kenya. And filed a case, one of the lawyers for one of the accused, filed a case saying they wanted a matter had in confidence.
Right.
So the Star got the story and published it, and even put a picture of the book where he, you know, signed. And immediately the judiciary passed a rule saying that no more access for journalists to the registry of the court. I have been a journalist for a number of years. At a certain time, I was a court reporter. And in court, we would always ask the registry, can we look at the file for this case? For the simple reason that you want to get your facts right. Sometimes maybe the magistrate read out a ruling which you didn't hear clearly, but by looking at the file, perusing it, you will get what he said. But suddenly there's a clampdown, you're told no more access because journalists are just coming here to look for divorce cases. But we have a right to access that information. So when the judiciary, under the former registrar, decides that no more access for journalists to the registry, we as an industry must come together and say this is wrong. I mean, it is not up to you to decide what we access in the court registry or not. But the fact that we don't have a single voice, no single sitting, I'm even encouraging Harun that next year you should have the first convention that brings together the owners, the editors, the journalists, the correspondents, so that we can thrash out issues that are cross-cutting.
I think, well, just two issues. Number one is the issues of the government advert agency. I think we need to look at the positive side of it. Number one is that the revenue or the advert allocation could also be given to the small media houses, the community media. Right? It means, therefore, we are able to build capacity and develop media that is not just necessarily mainstream. So that, but the problem would be that if the government is able to use that as a way of censoring the media, then would have a problem. But having said that, one of the biggest concerns that I have is on the quality of journalism. And take, for example, the issue of the graves, the alleged graves in northeastern province. how well are we able to check our facts? Who is setting the agenda? Is it the politician who are setting the agenda really, or is the media that's setting the agenda? Look at the issues of the NYS. We are looking at the political angle of the expose, not the economic implication of the corruption. So basically, we are so sensitive in issues that drives this nation.
Right.
It's just politics that we are so preoccupied with.
Important things you're saying, and we'll come back on that note. Just who is setting the agenda in the media? We're back in a moment.